Hello, my beautiful friend. Welcome to A Time to Care the Caregivers podcast. I'm Isabel and Becky, your host. Today, we have Becky Galli with us. She is an author, a columnist. She writes about love, loss, healing, surviving significant losses. Her 17-year-old brother's dead. Her son's degenerative disease and subsequent death. Her daughter's autism. She's been a caregiver for other people, for herself. She is a published author and she does all the things caregiving. Welcome, Becky.
Thank you so much for having me, Isabella. Appreciate you inviting me.
I think I skipped half of your bio because it's so vast and amazing that I want you to pour some light into us about, like, how did you end up being an author and supporting caregivers?
That's an interesting story. So you touched on my brother's death at age 17, a couple of special needs children, and that led to a divorce. And I will say we have a good divorce. We went into therapy for 3 years with him to make sure that we had good outcomes. I told our therapist, I want an amazing divorce or an amazing marriage. Either way, this is going to be a worthwhile time. So shortly after that, actually 9 days after my divorce was final, I became paralyzed by a rare inflammation of the spinal cord called transverse myelitis. It affects 1 in a million people. A third recover fully, a third recover partially, and a third have no recovery at all. My kids were 3, 4, 7, and 9. And those included the 2 with special needs. So it was a very busy time and a lot of time for uncertainty too, because I didn't know if I was going to walk again, had great hopes that I would. So a friend of mine that I hadn't seen in a very long time, this is back in 1997 when the internet was just coming into vogue. Anyway, my friend had read a column that my dad had published about, he called it the strain infection, and it's actually an inflammation, but at the time, infection. And in the article, he talked about how I became paralyzed, and everybody was very hopeful that things would be positive in the end. But my friend just reached out to me, hadn't talked to him in 15 years, and he sent me this email with the subject, "Is that you?" And at the time, with the kids and the paralysis and the outline, I was going, who am I right now? That's a great question. And fortunately, Scott, my friend, was a very quick typist and very curious. And so he asked me about my life, and I kind of updated him chapter at a time, from the marriage, the kids, the divorce, the paralysis, and began telling about stories about what it was like to live life in a wheelchair. So he started sharing the stories, and I started sharing the stories with family and friends. And one of my friends said, "Hey, do you realize you have readers?" And I was like, wow, I guess I do. I mean, I was in sales and marketing with IBM for years and outplacement consulting and marketing for that. I'd never really done any writing per se, but people seemed to enjoy the stories. So that a friend suggested, why don't you try to publish one? And so I had another friend that was a Baltimore Sun and reviewed what I'd written about the story about playing soccer with my son, who was then 4 at the time. And I would guard the garage door and wheel back and forth so he couldn't shoot in on me. And that was our way of playing soccer. So we called it wheelchair soccer, which is weird because you use your feet, which is the very thing I can't move. But anyway, it made a great little column, and came out in the Baltimore Sun, and I wrote a few more columns for them, op-ed pieces for them. And then a local weekly said, would you like to write a monthly column for us? And so I said, sure, Kim. So I thought, what's a good name for that? And I'm like, how about From Where I Sit? And it was just slice of life stories about what life is like, my crazy, crazy life with my kids, my paralysis, a very involved ex-husband. I mean, there was plenty of material to write about. So that after a while, somebody said, maybe you should write a book. And so my first book was called Rethinking Possible, which I think is a good mindset. It wasn't my title, but I really loved the publisher title, Rethinking Possible. So that was published in 2017. And then my latest book, Morning Fuel, which is daily inspirations to either inspire, encourage, or make you think. And people had asked me after reading my memoir, how do you do it? And one of my practices is to have a short reading every morning and have some reflective questions about that. Just kind of center myself for the day, because there's so much uncertainty ahead, and I figured if I could have just a moment for myself with a little story to try to inspire me, and so that was the second book that came about, trying to explain or share one of the practices that I've really found helpful in navigating life.
Yeah, I find it very important that people find that peace that brings them together, because for some is journaling, for others is meditating, for others is going to a boxing class, and you just need to find out that. So can you, and this is going to be for those who are into writing like you, that is definitely not me. So that's why I love bringing people with a different perspectives, because I tried a journaling last year, and I think it brought me more stress than joy. So I want someone who really enjoys it to bring this perspective. So why don't you share, like, what are some quotes and that you find important when you start your day?
One of my favorite quotes that allows me to kind of embrace the day as it is from my father. And it's called "No experience is wasted unless you let it be." And I think that
Goodness, that is this is completely out of subject. And I'm saying I don't enjoy writing, but I'm about to be a published author as well. And that is precisely what I talked about. Your everything you live is brings you something. It's not wasted. But please go. This is wonderful that you said that, because I just wrote about that, saying that I don't like writing.
right, but hey, and I think it hits us at different times. I have more to say about that, but the idea that no experience is wasted, his second piece of that, "unless you let it be," I think really puts the onus on us to look carefully at our life, to look carefully at our experiences, and to see what we can get from that. Some of the most terrible times have the greatest lessons, and we don't like to have the terrible times. But if you look back sometimes, I think that's one of the best ways to look, to see that that holds true. No experience is wasted unless you let it be, is if you look back and you will see evidence of, geez, that was terrible, but look what came from that. And sometimes I do that with my calendar. I'll look back and I'll think, geez, I was in the hospital for this and that was terrible. And then I think of all the positive things that came out of it that I didn't even realize at the time. But that perspective comes when you take the time to look back. I really think that that's one of my kind of governing principles, is to make sure I'm not wasting the experiences that I'm having, even though I might not like them. Another one is also from my father, very wise man, which is, don't cut what you can unravel. And I think that that really gives us an extra shot in the arm for being patient with letting things unfold as they're supposed to unfold, rather than us trying to take a shortcut or not think through it thoroughly. And it's probably an overused strength of mine that I can think and rethink and analyze, but that's, I've learned to accept that about myself. I just take time to process. That's just who I am. Other people I admire very quickly can see a situation, see a clear-cut way to go, and they go, and good for them. But I think a lot of this is our self-awareness of who we are and what we require to live in a healthy way.
At least in the work that I do, working with caregivers, a lot of the people see the way through, but they don't see other ways. They don't see other roads or other solutions, which in my opinion, that doesn't help them, or it doesn't help the situation. Because if everybody has a different way of solving a problem, if you gather mothers from all over the world and ask them how they feed their children in a healthy way, all of them are going to give you different ways depending on their culture. Some are going to say to feed them kimchi, and others are going to say to feed them raw eggs, or I don't know, like, the cultures are so different that you're going to get as many different answers. And the same happens within a family. When you just keep that focus in one solution, you close yourself to all the other possibilities.
That's very true, and I sometimes I like the image of a camera lens, how that we can zoom in and be isolated to only see what we wanna see, and sometimes we have to remind ourselves to zoom out to be able to incorporate other ideas, other ways, even if it's very foreign to us, to at least listen to them to see if maybe that could be appropriate for us. But that movement from zooming in to zooming out it's to change analogies, but it's kind of like this muscle. You've got to be able to repeatedly use it. Like, okay, I'm getting too close to this. I need to zoom out. And sometimes for me, that's a distraction. Like I've been focusing on this too long. I'm going to stick a audio book in my ear and listen to somebody else's story. And then when I come back, I'm kind of refreshed. Like, yeah, okay, let's look at this in a different way. Or I'm very much into nature too. I love to go out in my yard and see what's blooming and prune this and prune that, to just kind of detach from whatever I'm obsessing about, to distract myself into something that I is a good distraction, productive. You prune your petunias and they get fuller, and you water them and feed them and they get fuller, and you can kind of come back refreshed. I also do that with meditation and breathing, just taking a 7-minute little breathing thing that I do to just kind of reset and restore my body. It's almost like we all need our own toolkits to find out what resonates with us. Music is something great. If you look at all your senses, what can you see?
Mhm.
Is that nature? What can you hear? Is that music? What can you smell? Do you enjoy candles or flowers? You know, there are all kinds of ways we can reset ourselves.
Yeah. And what are good prompts to start journaling?
Well, I got very systematic about that. Well, going back up, the way I got into journaling was after my brother's death. I was having these spinning thoughts about, why him, why our family. He was a 17-year-old who was poised for he was a church leader, a student government leader, a musician, an athlete, just that kid had all this potential. And then water skiing accident. 9 days later, he was gone, and we were very close. And so my dad said, to capture these spinning thoughts, write them down. And that way you can at least put them somewhere other than in your mind. And then you look back at them and like, gosh, I had that thought the day before, but something about giving it permanence on paper was really therapeutic for me. And that's a practice I kept up through all these, when my son presented with seizures, and when my daughter presented with autism, and my youngest had a rare blood disorder, and when I was going through my divorce. I mean, I have a lot of these spinning thoughts found a place in my notebooks. So that was one aspect of how I used journaling, was to help me get through grief. The other, though, several years ago, I was hospitalized for sepsis, and I was very impatient with myself when I came back home. It's like, I don't feel like I'm making any kind of progress. And so I got kind of formulaic with how I journaled. And it was like, first of all, every morning I would write down my body, what's going on with my body? Has anything gotten better or worse? Write it down. Then what's going on with my life? What happened? And then what's going on with my mood? How am I feeling about everything that happened? And then I'd write
Hmm.
down a few little goals for the day. And then I'd write down a few little accomplishments from the day before. I could check the goals. It felt so good to have a goal and check it off. And then let's see, what do I do after that? Then I would do gratitude. I would say list three things that I'm grateful for. And I will say I love gratitude journaling. And I think that can be a very prominent part in coping with stress and being able to reset ourselves. But there's some days that gratitude, I was like, I don't have anything to be grateful for today, and it's okay. It's okay. Sometimes mine's just as simple as the wheelchair charged overnight, and I've got a full battery, and that's a little tiny thing, but it's something I'm really grateful for. And then lately, I've been doing insight. Like, is there any insight that I have gained about what's happened in the last few days? So that's the most structured journaling that I've ever done, and I've told other people about that. They were like, "That's a lot of work." But when I was recovering from sepsis, I could not see progress, and for me to look at that and say, the day before I couldn't get out of bed, for only 3 hours, and the next day I was out for 4 hours, and something about progress just made me feel it was encouraging. It was
Yeah.
really a tool of encouragement.
And that is the thing with what we do to fill our cups, that it is not static. What can fill our cups today might not be the same thing that will fill it up in 5 years or 10. We change, we have different perspectives, we evolve as people. The same way as you recover and you saw the progress, we also progress in life. We learn new things, we experience other things, and that changes who we are.
Absolutely. I think one of my long-term goals and one that I try to practice every day also is to live fully within whatever limits I have today. To really push that and say, I can't do this, but what can I still do? And to try to find joy and fulfillment and peace with what I can still do. There's a little trick I use that's sometimes when I find myself, I call it on the edge of a pity pit, where it's just right there. I know if I think one more negative thought, I'm going to just fall in. But even though whatever the situation is that I don't really like, I can still. And just those few words, even though I can still kind of forces you into a pivot to take
Mhm.
action within your limits.
Yes, I was in a conversation with someone earlier today, and we were talking about holding space for people. So that was part of the conversation. Like, I've made the conscious decision of stop going through news because that was stressing me. So my stressing time was filled up by bad news, and I would rather not read anything or just the major news so I can hold space for you or for other people that might need it, and be there present and be able to hold that space.
I like that concept, to keep your plate open so that it can absorb new things.
Because the thing is, like, we fill ourselves with crap that we can't control.
Yes.
And when there is crap that we can actually control, we don't have the space, the mindset, or the energy to do so. I'm already tired by everything that happened outside of my control zone. But when the one thing that I can control, which is open space for you, taking action within my boundaries of my life, I'm already tired to do so.
One of my friends a few years ago gave me this phrase, and it's so true and relate to what you're saying. She said, "What you focus on expands."
Mm.
And when you think about what you're talking about, if you obsess with the news or you obsess with your problems, it's like they get bigger and bigger and bigger because you are choosing to give them focus in your life and you're rooting out space for things that you may want to include.
Yes. Yeah. And you just let those, yeah, you need to focus on where you put your energy, your attention. And I think journaling, even though that frustrated me, or I find it very, like, I don't know, I might, after listening to you, I might give it another try.
Well, be patient with yourself. You don't have to do it every day, just every once in a while. I think sometimes we put these, "Oh, gotta do this every single day." Do it when you feel like you want to, when you can go back and read what you did. Yeah,
Love that. I think we're often not gentle enough with ourselves.
that's for sure. We can hold ourselves to pretty high standards sometimes. And my sister liked to say, you need to be your own best friend. How would you treat your friend in that situation? And think about, would you say that about your friend when you're looking in the mirror and you're, criticizing this or that? So it gives me pause.
Yeah, I was meeting with a friend, and she also has a podcast, and for her next season she wants to bring people with a lot of visibility, and she was talking about like she needs to do more research before connecting and pitching the podcast to these people and blah 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 blah. Blah. And she was like, if I were my client, I would be telling me this and that. And I was like, no, you wouldn't. You would be telling yourself what I am telling you right now. And she kind of like, wait, excuse me. And she was like, yeah, you're right. I would be I would be more encouraging. I would be like, hey, you need to do this. Yes, I agree with you. You need to let go of your procrastination. Yes, but you wouldn't be hard on yourself. And hey, why haven't you done it? Or,
Yeah, I agree.
yeah. So, what else? What other gems of knowledge can you share with us? Because I know we can go on forever.
Well, I again, I'll go back to one of the things that my father had told me, and at the time, I it's just true, but it isn't like the most uplifting thing at the on the first read, but he had written in the front of a book because he wrote a book about the death of his son, my brother, and, he said, "What I've come to understand is that sometimes the more difficult the life, the more life you will find." And it goes back to the struggles that we all have that can be so large, but there's life within those. There are paths in the wilderness, and I think, that's one of the things that I've learned in my many journeys through grief and loss is I've developed my own coping strategies for getting through. And you don't really realize what they are until you have a chance to look back. And what I found is that pretty much my successful journeys, and so far made it through them all so far. It's not over yet, but have these ways of coping where I have to be very honest about how I'm feeling. I can't deny those feelings when I get into denial. I think when we deny things, they pop out other ways. We need to find a safe place to talk about those kinds of feelings, to be very honest. Well, not only how we're feeling, but the second piece of that is what is our capacity to deal with how we're feeling? Can we
Mhm.
journal? Can we go through nature? Can we meditate? Do we need professional help? What is our capacity to take care of ourselves? And then that leads to the next step, which is who are your resources to help you get through? Which people can help you navigate these stormy seas? I call it who's in your boat, who is in your boat. And this isn't always the same people. Yeah, we might have our core girlfriends or support people or family, but not everybody is the best in all situations. I remember when my sister and I were going through this very deep grief over our father, we realized when we talked to each other, we just made grief worse because we kept, remembering and losing and being so sad. And so we said very lovingly to one another, I don't think we can really talk about how much we miss dad. We needed to find people outside of the family unit to talk to about this. And so, we didn't uninvite each other on the boat, but we just didn't rely on each other as heavily. And we included more people that weren't directly affected by the grief. So that I think was a big learning is that we can manage our support system. And that changes with time. It changes with the circumstance. But the other piece of this that is really important, I think, is to keep moving. I think you should never isolate. You need to be in community, a supportive community that can help you navigate what's next. And there's one thing to be alone; it's another to be isolating.
Yes.
And it's really hard to see that in yourself. But when you realize that you really haven't talked to anybody for a while, you haven't done anything for a while, it's time to reach out to somebody and just get a fresh perspective, whether it's a phone call, a visit, just to be out in the community sometimes. Change. My mom was always big about just sometimes you need a change of scenery. You just need somewhere different to be in order to let that, infiltrate and change your perspective.
Yes. Yeah, I do think that sometimes we just need a change of scenery.
Yeah, makes a big difference.
Yeah. So, where can people learn more about you, get your books, read everything you write?
Well, thanks for asking. So, my books, Morning Fuel and Rethinking Possible, they're available anywhere books are sold, Amazon, Barnes and Noble, your local independent bookstore. You can also find out more about them on my website, which is pretty simple. It's BECKY, Becky Galli, GALLI, BECKYGALLI.com. And it's also my big full author name, Rebecca Faye Smith Galli, but keeping it short, BeckyGalli.com. And on there, you can find links to my books, as well as to sign up for Thoughtful Thursdays, Lessons from a Resilient Heart, which is a column I write periodically about what's inspired me to stay positive that day. So there's some archives on there. I have a great little search bar at the top. If you want to search for anything, you can, and the columns will come up. And when you sign up for an email, I'll give you our free little offering. It's called 7 Strategies to Stay Up when life is pulling you down. And I offer 7 suggestions for how to stay up when life gets tough.
Thank you so much, Becky. I always love our conversations and all your bits and pieces of wisdom, which I don't think they're small, they're huge, at least for me.
Thank you so much. Really great to spend time with you.
Thank you. Hey, just for you to know, the content presented in this podcast is for informational and educational purposes only. The views and opinions expressed by the hosts and guests are their own and do not necessarily reflect the official policy or position of any affiliated organizations or sponsors. If you need additional advice, please contact the right partner for you.